During the early 90s in America, a rash of churches with predominantly black parishioners were set on fire. This created a racial divide that tore the Christian community and the country apart. When Pastor Mark Strong's church was burnt down, he had a decision to make. Simisola Okai sat down with him to find out what he did that changed the course of his community.
Now, someone set your church on fire in 1996.
Yes.
And your first reaction, without knowing who the person was or why they did it, was to forgive. Why did you choose forgiveness?
Our goal and our passion was to glorify Jesus. And so instead of choosing to be angry and to throw stones, we said, what was the best way for us to be able to honor God through this situation and make him known through this? And so we made a conscious decision as a church to do that. And the Lord used that, and he gave us an opportunity to bless and to minister to our city in a wonderful way.
Now I want to go deeper into forgiveness. Now you co-authored a book with Dr. Wilkinson.
Yes.
Called The Freedom Factor. And the part that really got me was the parable from Matthew 18, where you say unforgiveness is tied to suffering. So it's not only that we should forgive, but we need to forgive.
Right.
Why is that?
You know, you read about the man who was forgiven, let's say, a fortune, and then there was another man that owed him McDonald's money. And so when he went to this guy says, you know, please forgive me. This man who had been forgiven a fortune, he had just had a debt canceled that was amazing, but he could not forgive this man who owed him pocket change for just a couple pennies. He wouldn't do it. So he choked the man, threw him into prison. When the master found out what happened, he calls him in to give an account. And the master says, take this wicked servant, hand him over to the torturers until his debt is paid. And so we've read that scripture many, many times, but what we fail to realize is that last little verse that says, God will do likewise to you if you don't forgive your brother from your heart. So what happens is when we don't forgive, what God does is God removes that protective barrier of peace from around our lives, and we are subjected to discomfort, suffering until we pay the debt, which is forgiveness. And so many people today are suffering physically, they're suffering emotionally, relationships, spiritually, and they have not made the connection that the suffering that they're experiencing is linked to unforgiveness. But there's that link that's there, and the only thing that can break that is by forgiving. So you can have people pray for you. You can have people, depending on what a person's tradition is, they can pour oil on your head and they can anoint you with oil, and you can do all these type of things. But until you actually forgive your brother or your sister from the heart, that suffering and that torment is not going to stop, because what God is doing in his love and his mercy, he's disciplining us so that he brings us to a place of obedience to forgive. And then once you forgive, it's over with.
Now you talk about some of the steps to, reaching out and forgiving someone, and that includes extending compassion to the people that have hurt you. Now we have viewers who've had horrific things happen to them.
Sure.
Murder, their families were killed in front of them.
Yes.
All sorts of things. So what would you tell them to release themselves from any unforgiveness they may have?
There was a lady in our church. Her son was murdered. He was shot in the head. She called me about 1 o'clock at night, said, "When you go to the hospital with me." I met her at the hospital. The nurse came, they said, "Well, we're gonna take you back there. He's gone. We cleaned up the room as best we can just so you can see your son." She says, "Okay, I'm gonna go. My pastor's gonna go back there with me." Well, the strength almost left out of my body, because I didn't want to go back there and see a sight like that. In fact, when I went home, I didn't even turn the light off at night. I just left the light on because I couldn't get over that. Fast forward about 2 months, she calls me again and she says, "The young man that shot my son is in jail. I want to go see him." I stood by that lady as she talked to her son, as she talked to the young man that killed her son, and she says, "You are a sinner just like I am. God has forgiven me. You hurt me very, very badly. I miss my son very, very badly until this day. But I forgive you." She was able to do that because she looked in her heart And she realized that God had given her mercy, and out of the mercy she had received from God, she was able to extend that to the person that hurt her and wounded her so very, very badly. So for a person that's watching, what I would say is, I don't want to minimize their hurt. I don't want to minimize their pain, because it's real. It's deep. It's traumatic. But at the same time, if you can think about the grace and the mercy that God has poured into your life, then you can extend compassion to that person to be able to move through the rest of the steps that are in the book in terms of how you can forgive that person, find freedom. Because ultimately, when we don't forgive, even though it's very, very traumatic, we are the ones that suffer, not the person that injured or wounded us.